The NBA season is rapidly approaching. The Philadelphia 76ers remain one of the teams at the top of everyone's mind. Well, Paul George recently had Chet Holmgren on his podcast and may have misspoken in a way that offended some Sixers fans. So I'm going to dive into specifically what was said, why I think it's being a bit overblown, and what the real lesson here is Tyrese Maxey remains one of the most underrated players in the entire NBA. So the topic of conversation that did come up, once again, he had Chet Holmgren on the podcast P. And by the way, I do think Paul George does a really nice job on the podcast. The player podcasts are quite the controversial topic because, there are these barriers that get broken down, them embracing this new media technique, and sometimes the lines get blurred in a way that does offend some people or rub people the wrong way. I think Draymond Green and Pat Beverly are more clear examples of that, although we will see the show front and center with the podcast P podcast right here in Philadelphia, so we'll see how that all shakes out. But I do think Paul George does a really nice job on it, and he did have Chet Holmgren on, one of the young up-and-coming stars. He was asked a question, or at the end of the podcast, Paul George presents the opportunity for his guest to ask him a question, and Chet Holmgren kind of poked the bear a little bit. So I do want to dive into what was specifically said and everything else and how it relates to the Sixers team, as well as why I think the Olympics might be a key for why this is a good news for Sixers fans here. Now, before I dive fully into everything, I want to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back on the other side. Listen, guys, we all have bad habits, and sometimes the easier they are to access, the harder they are to break. That's why I wanted to introduce you to our new friends over at Fume, who are a flavored air device with no nicotine, no vapor, and completely non-toxic flavors. If vapor is the sticky soda in your body, then Fume is like the herbal tea. Fume is backed up by doctors in the USA and also continuously invests in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their product. There have been over 300,000 customers thus far, and you could be the next success story. With flavors like crisp mint, orange vanilla, raspberry lemon, and plenty more, there is truly something for everyone. Whether you desire that oral fix, the need to fidget, or just like the award-winning flavors, Fume could be for you. Fill the void in a natural, guilt-free way, as our Philadelphia sports teams give us plenty of reasons to worry about our own health already. For a limited time, use my code DIGEST to get your free topper. It's the perfect accessory to your Fume device. Slip it onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. It's chewable for those of you who like to fidget, and it's reusable. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code DIGEST, or scan the QR code on your screen right now to get your free Fume topper when you order your journey pack today. So the question that was brought up by Chet Holmgren here to dive into officially, he asked, "Let me try and F up y'all chemistry," Holmgren joked at the 43-40 mark of the episode before asking George if he or Embiid will take command in crunch time. George co-host Jackie Long and Dallas Rutherford loved that Holmgren whipped out such a bold question, to which Paul George replied, quote, "That's a Nick Nurse question," George said. "I'm going to deflect that to Nick Nurse. Whoever Nick Nurse draws it up for, that's who's going to get the best shot." Holmgren, who replied that George gave a, quote, PR answer, asked if George would be salty if he didn't get the ball at the end of the game. The 76ers star said he wouldn't be and said, quote, "I've dealt with that. I've been on teams where with other superstars, live and die with whoever takes it," he said. Now, really, what specifically rubbed people the wrong way here is there was no mention of Tyrese Maxey. And I personally was pretty shocked when looking at the replies. I did tweet out the initial video of this from the podcast here, clip that up, and every single reply pretty much that I was in is, where's the mention of Tyrese Maxey? There's just more evidence of Tyrese Maxey remaining underrated, and I do agree with that sense here. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of this left shot with the Sixers team, and in particular, why I think Joel Embiid is uniquely in a position to lean on others in a way he has not in the rest of his career. Now, we know what Tyrese Maxey can do on the court. Coming off a season in which he averaged 25.9 points per game, also took a significant playmaking leap, averaging those 6.2 points per game. And I don't want to get lost just how impactful the growth that Tyrese Maxey is. I mean, when you look at his stats on a year-by-year basis, and I still believe he is very clearly in the upward trajectory at this point, but he's taken notable leaps year in and year out. Now, when we get down to crunch time, I do think last year was a growing up season for Tyrese Maxey. We were past the point of this young, exciting prospect to now it was, they need this guy. And I think this season that's going to even take another stride forward, as obviously he was handed that massive max contract, which he earned every penny of and deserves a ton of credit, which I will continue to bring it up for putting off signing that extension to open the door for Paul George to even come to the Sixers because of the way that the salary cap worked in that regard. So shout out to Tyrese Maxey once again. Now, to put the exact numbers up, and shout out to Paul Don't Lie, Paul Headley NBA, who broke this down in one of my quote tweets here, who said that everyone is saying Maxey, but if we are strictly talking about shot making in the clutch, Maxey is 25 for 71 with 86 points, which is a 40.1% effective field goal percentage. Paul George 19 for 39, which is 76 points on a 59% effective field goal percentage, and Joel Embiid 11 for 30, which is 48 points and just a 38.4 effective field goal percentage. Now, I think these stats are a little bit misleading here. Obviously, the sample size fairly small for each of them, and with Joel Embiid, when you base in that effective field goal percentage, that he kind of gets points against him because he's mostly taking twos. Although when I think to the biggest shots of Joel Embiid careers, the game winners in which he has hit, the one in Toronto in last year's playoffs certainly jumps to mind. That was a 3-point shot. I think it was 2 years ago at this point. That was a 3-point shot that he did knock down in Toronto there. Now, the greatest concept that I want to get here is I don't necessarily disagree that Tyrese Maxey should be in the driving force, and I do think it should be quite clear on the Sixers roster pretty early on that the pecking order should still be Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Paul George. While PG is notably better than this guy, I think we should essentially be looking at him as what we wanted Tobias Harris to grow into. And yes, he's better at just about every aspect of basketball. It should be a significant leap in this, but I still think there's something to the bones of what this team has established with the two-man actions with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. And Paul George can certainly have his nights where he gets hot. We know what he can do as far as an on-court standpoint, and just diving off what he produced last year. It's notable stats here, 22.6 points per game, and what excites me the most about this is 41.3% from three, 45.7% from the corner here. He is going to be a lethal catch-and-shoot option. Now, when push comes to shove and you get into clutch time, you're not often relying on those catch-and-shoot opportunities. That is about going and getting a bucket, and I think that's one of the hurdles that the Sixers have inherently run into when being built around Joel Embiid. While I don't think this is any knock on Joel Embiid's talent, his clutch ability, having that dog in him, any of these characteristics that I often think are unfairly thrown his way, where I do think there's substance to, is it's difficult to build around a big man in today's modern NBA. And there's things you can do schematically on the defensive side of the ball to prevent him from getting the looks that you can't quite do with perimeter-oriented players like Paul George and Tyrese Maxey. I'm talking about doubling, talking about, denying an entry pass, that I think that's one of the things that Joel has clearly set his sights on and become so effective at operating on the perimeter and in the mid-range to kind of combat that in his own game. Now, while I appreciate that from Joel, that does not necessarily mean that that is the best shot for the Sixers. And I'm thrilled that Nick Nurse is going to be the guy calling up plays, because too often in the Doc Rivers era and even some of the Brett Brown era, it was too much of give the ball to the guy and everybody else stand around and watch. I think there was plenty of that with Joel Embiid. That was more or less the Doc Rivers offense for the Sixers team. And sure, Joel Embiid put up numbers. Sure, we know what he can do as far as an on-court setting. I don't want to sell this guy short as far as how statistically dominant he has been, coming off a season which he averaged 34.7 points per game, leading the league for the third consecutive season, 11 rebounds and 5.6 assists. That assist growth is extremely noteworthy to me, and something that I think he'll be more willing to lean on others in a way that we have not seen from him in his career. But I do want to break it down and understand that this is a two-way street. That yes, Joel Embiid has not had the talent to lean on, but Joel Embiid also has to be willing to lean on others. That too often we do see him fight through double and triple teams. And does he score on them? Far more often than just about any player that you could guess. But the reality is you got to be doing the best thing for the team, and that is the year that this is the year that we should truly see that come into effect. And I am optimistic that that will be the case. And one of the driving forces why was playing with the Olympics with these other ball dominant stars that Joel had to share the floor with. And he had this quote that made me jumping for joy following the Olympics, saying, quote, "That's been a great experience to learn from," Embiid told reporters after the gold medal game. "When I go back to Philly, having some of my other guys just learning how to take a step back and letting them do their thing and taking over when needed, that's been something I've gotten from this experience." That should be the exact goal, and why it was important to him to share the floor with the Steph Currys and the LeBron James and the Kevin Durants of this world, who obviously, when you're playing with them, it's not as great if you're soaking up 15 seconds of the shot clock before pulling up into a mid-range. Yes, the Sixers have needed Joel Embiid to do that for years of his career here in Philadelphia, but it should be a different story this year when you do have these talents. An ascending star with Tyrese Maxey, who is the most improved player in the NBA last year, a first-time All-Star. Paul George, who has a decorated resume, 9-time All-Star, a guy who's been on all NBA teams and is a player that will be very clearly the ideal third star in a way that Joel simply has not had. And even when you want to compare to some of the other co-stars we've had, with James Harden, obviously Tyrese Maxey was a part of that as well, but that Tyrese Maxey was not this Tyrese Maxey, that he's taken significant steps forward to that time. And even the Jimmy Butler comparisons that often get thrown, all the critiques of Joel Embiid, well, that Joel Embiid was not this Joel Embiid. That was pre-MVP, before he took many significant step forward in his growth as a player. So this has to be the year where it all comes together. And while I do think this ruffled a couple feathers, this quote from Paul George here, first off, a little hat tip to Chet Holmgren for stirring the pot in the way he clearly intended on doing. I am a fan of the mind games and playing that, especially this early on. I don't think there's too much to read into here. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I don't think Paul George is quite familiar with what Tyrese Maxey can do at this point. And even flashback to that playoffs last year at the Knicks series, Joel was ultra willing to give Tyrese Maxey the ropes and opportunities, and Tyrese was the guy that delivered. I will never forget that deep three-point shot that he hit to tie up the game and ultimately win him that game. That emotion that he showed running down the court, firing himself up after the fact. I loved every bit about that, and to me that was another example of this is the upward spiral of his career that we're just seeing the beginnings of for Tyrese. So I do think that's going to be a notable step towards this year, and I do think that while this is no critique of Joel overall, I still think he's going to be the innings eater pitcher, the guy that is, doing most of the statistical damage throughout the game. I still expect him to be the leading scorer on the Sixers team, but there's nothing wrong with him taking a bit of a step back and relying on these guys. In fact, I think that's likely the best path for this Sixers team. I've been pretty open and will reinforce the point that I'm kind of hoping for him to take a statistical step back this year. I don't need him averaging his 34.7 points per game. If we're talking more in the 25 points with an uptick in rebounds, an uptick in assists, that could be a very successful season for Joel Embiid and really what I think is best for this Sixers team. And again, I'm very happy that Nick Nurse is the guy at the helm. I do trust him to be able to draw up plays in these creative ways, and I think there's going to be a different closing lineup on pretty much a night-to-night basis. The Gershon Yabuselis of the world, there will be nights where his rebounding force will be needed in certain matchups. Guys like Caleb Martin certainly will need to be on the floor. Kelly Oubre, maybe nights where he will be, nights where he won't be. Eric Gordon, maybe his shooting will be necessary on some nights. Maybe a guy like Jared McCain established himself as an important part of this Sixers team, and in certain matchups, his shooting and his secondary ball handling is going to be really helpful to this team. There's a lot of really good pieces on this team, but I do really believe this is the deepest team in the Sixers, in the Joel Embiid Sixers era. Shout out to RB Philly Take for tweeting out this graphic here. You can see all these names that are very exciting. Kyle Lowry, another name that will be in the mix. KJ Martin will be interesting to see what his role is with the Sixers team. The bottom line is there is a lot to still be discovered about this Sixers team, and I think Paul George is finding that out firsthand. That don't sell Tyrese Maxey short, because he's going to be right in the same mix. You guys are going to be looking at yourself in the eyes as peers. This is not you are the secondary superstar to step in next to Joel Embiid. If anything, I think Paul George is that third guy being added to the mix. So while I think this is just off-season talk, for the most part overstated at this point in time, it did give me a little bit of a sense to me of maybe Paul George not quite as familiar with Tyrese Maxey's game as he will be in the very short term. But ultimately, those things will work themselves out as the season goes on. It is going to be very important for this team to learn to play together, learn to play off each other, and figure out the best way to become a cohesive unit. But I'm very excited for the potential that the Sixers team has, and I think the rest of the NBA will be finding that out quite soon. But I do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Was that a quote that bothered you? Did that rub you the wrong way? And my last kind of point here, I do see the video circling of Paul George being locked up in this kind of exhibition game in China right now. My only takeaway from this is if we've learned anything from the Ben Simmons era, that is off-season videos do not count for anything whatsoever. So wipe that from the internet, wipe that from your minds, and proceed as normal Sixers fans. But appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in this video here. Make sure you're smashing the subscribe on the channel if you have not already. We're getting close to the season coming up on us, so want every one of you a part of the Sixers Digest family. Drop a like on this video and your comments below, and I'll be talking to you next time. Peace.